In 1922, a 36-year-old shop superintendent in southern New Jersey watched a man lose 2 fingers to a table saw. The blade caught a knot in a pine board. The torque kicked the timber backwards, and the worker's hands followed the wood straight into the teeth. It took 4 seconds. The superintendent's name was Raymond DeWalt, and that afternoon he walked back to his office at Seabrook Farms and began sketching a machine that would move the blade to the wood instead of the wood to the blade. That sketch became the most important power tool of the 20th century. It made DeWalt a household name in every woodworking shop in America. And then, 60 years later, the company that owned that name buried it so deep that professional contractors forgot it ever existed. So how did a forgotten brand from the 1920s become the yellow empire that dominates every commercial construction site on the planet? If you carry yellow on your belt, you're going to want to hear how it got there. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. Bridgeton, New Jersey, 1922. Raymond Elmer DeWalt was not an engineer. He had no university degree. He had grown up in Oakville, a village in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, learning to cut wood in his father John's wagon wheel shop. Building wagon wheels is one of the most exacting trades in American woodworking. Every spoke has to be cut to identical dimensions. Every mortise has to seat flush. Every felloe has to bend true. Raymond learned precision the old way, with calloused hands and a foreman who measured twice because lumber cost money. By his mid-30s, he had bounced through a string of carpentry, contracting, and mill superintendent jobs across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. None of them made him rich. All of them taught him the same lesson. The machines in every shop he ever walked into were designed to make the operator do the dangerous work. The table saw was the worst offender. A spinning steel blade fixed in an iron slab, waiting for a man to push heavy timber across its teeth. If the grain pinched the blade, the saw would kick the board backwards with enough force to crack ribs. If the operator flinched at the wrong moment, the blade took whatever was in front of it. Missing fingers were not accidents. They were the cost of doing business. When Raymond arrived at Seabrook Farms, he walked into something much bigger than a typical mill. Seabrook was not a farm in any ordinary sense. It was a sprawling agro-industrial empire run by Charles Franklin Seabrook, a man Forbes would later call the Henry Ford of agriculture. By the 1940s, Seabrook would control over 54,000 acres of farmland across 3 states, employ 6,000 workers, and ship frozen vegetables to grocery stores from coast to coast. But in 1922, it was already enormous, and Raymond DeWalt's job was to run the on-site woodworking mill that produced every shipping crate, packing box, and farm building the operation needed. His bosses wanted higher output. They refused to authorize more workers. Raymond was trapped between a production quota and a machine that punished anyone who tried to move faster. He later said it plainly. The president of the company would not let him increase the payroll, so he simply had to get more work out of the men he had. Most superintendents would have pushed their crews harder and accepted the injuries. Raymond did something different. He went home and started building. His prototype was crude. He took a standard electric circular saw motor and, instead of mounting it beneath a table, he suspended it above the table on a heavy iron yoke. That yoke was bolted to a horizontal arm that could slide back and forth across the work surface. The operator clamped the timber flat to the table, grabbed the handle, and pulled the spinning blade across the wood in a smooth, controlled arc. The wood never moved. The blade did all the traveling. He called it the Wonder Worker. The mechanical elegance of Raymond's invention was in its articulation. The motor head could rotate a full 360 degrees. It could tilt for bevel cuts. The arm could swing for miter angles. A single operator, working alone, could perform crosscuts, rip cuts, miters, bevels, dados, tenons, rabbets, and, with the right attachments, routing, shaping, sanding, and boring. DeWalt's own sales literature would later boast that the Wonder Worker could do everything except a handspring. On January 27, 1923, Raymond filed his patent application with the United States Patent Office for what he titled, simply, woodworking machinery. Patent number 1,528,536 was granted on March 3, 1925. In between, in 1924, he founded the DeWalt Products Company in Leola, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The first production models shipped from a small plant, priced in the mid-200s, roughly $4,000 in today's money. Expensive enough to be a serious purchase for a small shop. Cheap enough to pay for itself inside a single building season. The industry noticed immediately. Contractors who bought the machine reported that a single worker on a Wonder Worker could outproduce 4 men on a table saw with cleaner cuts and without risking a hand. By 1929, demand had outgrown the Leola plant, and Raymond relocated to a larger, modern facility in Lancaster. By the early 1930s, the DeWalt radial arm saw was being sold internationally, with a foreign sales director named Benjamin Baker building distribution networks across Europe, South America, and Asia. And then Raymond DeWalt did something that nobody expected. At the moment his company was reaching its early peak, he sold it. He handed the business and patents to partners Paul Gardner and Isaac Rutt, and he walked away. He had decided to found a religious communal order. The details of that spiritual venture are sparse in the surviving record, but what followed is documented. During the Great Depression, Raymond took a position as superintendent of the National Youth Administration's shops in York, Pennsylvania, training young men in the trades. Later, he became a shop teacher at Mechanicsburg High School, where he taught woodworking until late in his life. The man who invented the most important woodworking machine of his century spent his final decades teaching teenagers how to use it. He never got rich. He never ran a corporate empire. He built a machine, proved it worked, handed it off, and went back to teaching. Meanwhile, the company he left behind was thriving without him. During World War II, the United States government purchased DeWalt radial arm saws by the thousands. They were shipped to military bases across the country and overseas, issued as standard equipment for the construction of barracks, mess halls, ammunition crates, and field hospitals. Every GI who swung a hammer during the war knew the DeWalt name, and when those men came home and started building houses in the post-war construction boom, they brought that familiarity with them. The DeWalt radial arm saw became the centerpiece of the American woodworking shop, the machine that every serious contractor expected to find when he walked through the door. Raymond DeWalt died on May 8, 1961, in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. He was 75 years old. His death came less than a year after the company that bore his name changed hands for the last time. Because by 1961, the DeWalt Products Company had already been swallowed twice. The first buyer was the American Machine and Foundry Company, better known as AMF, the same conglomerate that would later own Harley-Davidson. AMF acquired DeWalt in 1949, folding the radial arm saw line into its portfolio of industrial machinery. For a decade, AMF kept the saws in production and the brand visible. Then, in 1960, Black & Decker came calling. The Towson, Maryland power tool giant purchased DeWalt from AMF, adding the radial arm saw to its existing lineup of portable drills, sanders, and jigsaws. On paper, the marriage made sense. Black & Decker was the largest power tool manufacturer in the world, and the DeWalt name was synonymous with precision woodworking. In practice, it was a slow burial. The construction industry was changing beneath Black & Decker's feet. In the 1970s, the portable electric miter saw appeared, a lightweight machine that could be carried onto a job site in one hand and do most of the cross-cutting work that had previously required a 500-pound radial arm saw bolted to a bench. Carpenters no longer needed to build a permanent saw station. They could chop lumber wherever they were standing. The radial arm saw did not die overnight. but by the mid-1980s, it was a relic on most commercial job sites. Black & Decker stopped innovating the DeWalt line. They stopped advertising it. They stopped manufacturing it entirely around 1985 or 1986, and in 1989, they divested the radial arm saw branch to two former executives. The rights eventually passed to a small company in Britt, Iowa, called the Original Saw Company, which still manufactures industrial radial arm saws today for lumber yards and pallet shops. The DeWalt name was dead, a trademark sitting in a filing cabinet in Towson, Maryland, attached to nothing. Black & Decker had much bigger problems. By 1990, the American professional power tool market had been conquered by a Japanese company called Makita. Makita's teal-colored tools were everywhere. Commercial framers carried them. Concrete crews relied on them. Electricians trusted them. Black & Decker's professional market share had collapsed to roughly 8%. The reason was not engineering. Black & Decker could build tools as durable as anything Makita shipped. The problem was the name on the case. Throughout the 1980s, Black & Decker had spent its marketing budget selling Dustbusters, coffee makers, toaster ovens, and plastic consumer drills to suburbanites. The brand had become, in the eyes of every union carpenter and commercial contractor in America, a housewife brand. No framer building a 40-story high-rise was going to pull a Black & Decker drill out of his tool bag. He would have been laughed off the site. Black & Decker's CEO was a man named Nolan Archibald. Archibald had joined the company in 1985 as president and was named CEO in March 1986 at the age of 42, making him the youngest chief executive in the Fortune 500 at the time. He was a former basketball player from Weber State, a Harvard MBA, and a corporate operator who understood that perception is reality in the trades. He knew his engineers could build world-class professional tools. He also knew that putting the Black & Decker logo on those tools was the same as putting a target on them. The competitive landscape made the problem worse. It was not just Makita. Milwaukee Electric Tool, the Wisconsin company that had invented the Sawzall in 1951, still commanded fierce loyalty among electricians and plumbers. Bosch held the concrete and rotary hammer market. Hilti owned the high end of structural fastening with a fleet rental model that commercial contractors either loved or resented. Black & Decker had the engineering to compete with all of them. What it did not have was a name that any of their customers would take seriously. Archibald needed a stealth brand, a name with blue-collar credibility and zero association with kitchen appliances. He found it in his own basement. A young marketing executive named Joseph Galli was given the assignment. Galli was in his early 30s, the son of an Italian-American auto salvage operator in New Kensington, Pennsylvania. His father had worked 6 days a week into his late 70s. Galli had wrestled at the University of North Carolina, captained the team, and won the Atlantic Coast Conference Championship at 142 pounds. He had joined Black & Decker straight out of college in 1980 and spent the next 12 years proving he could sell anything. When Galli's team conducted market research on the dormant DeWalt name, the results stunned them. 70% of professional tradesmen still recognized the brand, even though it had not been actively marketed in years, and 90% of those who recognized it had a favorable opinion. The name had, as Galli would describe it, an almost mystical power among the trades. In January 1992, Black & Decker launched a completely new line of approximately 30 premium portable power tools under the DeWalt brand. The Black & Decker name appeared nowhere on the packaging. The tools were engineered from Black & Decker's existing professional-grade platform, re-engineered for higher durability, and priced slightly above the comparable Makita product. A deliberate premium signal. But the tools were not the weapon. The color was. Galli chose industrial yellow and black. Not because it was attractive, because it was aggressive. Yellow is the color of caution tape, bulldozers, front-end loaders, and heavy machinery. It triggers a subconscious association with danger, mass, and industrial power. No major competitor owned yellow. Makita owned teal. Milwaukee owned red. Bosch owned blue. Yellow was unclaimed territory, and Galley planted a flag in it. Then he did something the power tool industry had never seen. He bypassed retail executives entirely and took the tools directly to the people who would use them. Galley personally recruited teams of young brand ambassadors, many of them college athletes from his University of North Carolina networks, and put them in fleets of bright yellow and black trucks. They drove into the mud of active construction sites, parked outside Home Depot stores and lumber yards, walked into union halls, and handed yellow DeWalt drills to framers, electricians, and concrete workers. They did not ask anyone to buy. They asked them to try to burn the motor out. These were the swarm teams, and they were everywhere. Galley himself spent 75% of his time on the road, showing up unannounced at store openings on weekends, working alongside retail staff, shaking hands with contractors who had no idea the yellow drill in their hand was made by the same company as their wife's Dustbuster. The results were immediate and devastating to the competition. DeWalt sales went from practically zero in 1992 to nearly $1 billion annually by the end of the decade. Black & Decker's professional market share surged from 8% to over 40% by 1995. Makita's American dominance was broken in 3 years. If you are finding value in this story, take a second and subscribe. We cover the stories behind the machines and companies that built the modern world. By 1999, Galley's worldwide power tools and accessories division was generating $3.1 billion, roughly 70% of Black & Decker's total revenue. He was the heir apparent to Archibald's corner office. And then, in April 1999, he was gone. A dispute with Archibald over chief executive officer succession timing ended with Galley's abrupt departure. Black & Decker's stock dropped 8% the day the news broke. Galley went to Amazon as Jeff Bezos's first president and chief operating officer, reportedly receiving a $7.9 million signing bonus. He stayed 13 months. Then he ran Newell Rubbermaid as chief executive officer for 4 years, presiding over 10 consecutive quarters of declining sales before resigning by mutual agreement. And then, in 2006, Joseph Galley joined Tektronic Industries of Hong Kong. This is the part of the story that reads like fiction. Tektronic Industries is the parent company of Milwaukee Tool, Ryobi, Hoover, and AEG. The man who built DeWalt into a professional powerhouse, who painted it yellow and sent swarm teams into the mud to destroy Makita, now leads the single fiercest competitor DeWalt faces on every job site in America. While Galley was building his next empire in red, DeWalt was building its next revolution in volts. The cordless power tool is the defining technology of the modern construction site. No extension cords, no generators dragged through the mud, no tripping over 100 feet of orange cable on the 3rd floor of a framing project. The tool that untethered the tradesman from the wall outlet changed the way buildings get built. DeWalt entered the cordless race in the mid-1990s with STEM-style nickel-cadmium battery packs running at 14.4 volts and 18 volts. They were heavy, they faded under load, and they took hours to recharge. But they worked. And for a decade, nickel-cadmium was the only chemistry the industry had. The lithium-ion revolution changed everything. Makita was first to market with its 18-volt LXT lithium platform in 2005, building a 7-year head start in ecosystem depth and contractor loyalty. DeWalt watched, and when it moved big. In June 2011, DeWalt launched the 20V Max system, a complete lithium-ion platform built around a new slide-on battery form factor that was fundamentally different from the old STEM-style packs. The slide-on design allowed slimmer tool handles, better balance, and faster swaps. The initial lineup shipped with 13 tools, including compact and premium drill drivers, impact drivers, a hammer drill, a reciprocating saw, a circular saw, and an SDS rotary hammer. There was a controversy baked into the name. The battery was technically an 18-volt nominal pack, 5 lithium-ion cells in series at 3.6 volts each. The 20V max designation referred to the peak voltage measured under no load. Makita and Milwaukee both pointed this out. DeWalt's response was to sell more tools than both of them. The 20V Max platform eventually scaled past 250 compatible products. It became the most widely adopted battery ecosystem in the North American construction market. And it still was not enough. Because even at 20 volts, there was a ceiling. A battery-powered impact driver could sink a lag bolt. A battery-powered circular saw could rip a sheet of plywood. But a battery-powered table saw, a battery-powered 12-inch miter saw, a battery-powered planer. Those tools demanded the kind of sustained, high-amperage power that only a corded connection to the electrical grid could provide. Framers still had to drag generators onto job sites. Finnish carpenters still had to hunt for outlets. On September 1, 2016, DeWalt shattered that ceiling. The product was called FlexVolt, and it was unlike anything the power tool industry had ever seen. A single battery pack containing 15 lithium-ion cells and a patented mechanical switch that could reconfigure those cells on the fly. Slide a FlexVolt battery into a standard 20-volt max drill, and the cells arranged themselves in parallel banks of 5, delivering 18 volts nominal at high amp hours. Slide that same battery into a 60-volt max circular saw, and the internal switch flipped the cells into a series parallel arrangement, instantly delivering 54 volts nominal at lower amp hours. 2 FlexVolt packs clipped together powered the 120-volt max tools, the 12-inch miter saws, and the 8¼ table saw that had never before existed without a power cord. The same battery. 3 voltage platforms. No adapter. No compromise. Nobody else in the industry had anything like it. Nobody else has matched it since. The first FlexVolt tools to ship were the 7¼ circular saw, a reciprocating saw, an angle grinder, a stud and joist drill, a job site table saw, and 2 12-inch miter saws. The generation of framers who had spent their careers dragging extension cords could finally cut the cord. Permanently. 5 years later, DeWalt went after the battery itself. For decades, every cordless tool battery on Earth was built the same way. You took cylindrical lithium-ion cells, the same basic shape as an AA battery, packed them into a plastic housing, and wired them together. The geometry was wasteful. Cylinders do not stack efficiently. There are air gaps between every cell, dead space that adds bulk and traps heat. On October 13, 2021, DeWalt introduced PowerStack. It was the first battery from a major power tool manufacturer to use flat lithium polymer pouch cells instead of cylinders. Picture the battery inside a smartphone, then picture 5 of those stacked into a tool battery pack. No air gaps, no wasted space. Every cubic millimeter occupied by energy-producing material. The compact PowerStack delivered 50% more power than a comparable cylindrical pack in a housing that was 25% smaller and 15% lighter. It ran cooler. It lasted longer. And it snapped into every 20-volt max tool DeWalt had ever made. While DeWalt was reinventing the battery, its corporate parentage changed one final time. On November 2, 2009, the Stanley Works and Black & Decker announced an all-stock merger valued at $4.5 billion. The deal closed on March 12, 2010, creating Stanley Black & Decker, a combined entity with pro forma revenue of $8.4 billion. Nolan Archibald, the man who had greenlit the 1992 DeWalt relaunch, became executive chairman of the merged company. DeWalt became the crown jewel of a conglomerate that also owned Stanley, Craftsman, Porter Cable, Bostitch, Irwin, and Lennox. By full year 2024, Stanley Black & Decker reported total revenue of $15.4 billion. The tools and outdoor segment alone generated $13.3 billion. DeWalt was singled out by the company's chief executive officer as the primary growth engine, logging 8 consecutive quarters of organic revenue growth through early 2025. The brand has expanded far beyond power tools. DeWalt hand tools launched in 2011. Mechanics tools followed in 2013. The Tough System and TSTAK modular storage lines turned the yellow case into job site furniture. Cordless outdoor power equipment, lawn mowers, trimmers, blowers, and chainsaws arrived in 2018. And in 2024, the PowerShift line began electrifying the concrete job site, replacing gas-powered trowel machines and vibrators with battery-powered alternatives. Through all of this expansion, one relationship has been more important than any other. Home Depot has been DeWalt's primary retail partner since the 1992 relaunch. Galley's swarm teams were sent largely into Home Depot stores. The brand's biggest promotional cycles are timed and merchandised around Home Depot's contractor traffic. But, unlike Milwaukee, which is sold exclusively through Home Depot, DeWalt maintains dual-rail distribution. It is also widely available through Lowe's, Acme Tools, Amazon, and independent dealers. That broader reach is one of the reasons DeWalt consistently leads in total unit volume across the North American market. The Built in the USA with Global Materials initiative, announced in December 2013, reinforced the domestic credibility that Raymond DeWalt established a century earlier. The flagship facility was a 1.2 million square foot assembly plant in Charlotte, North Carolina, codenamed Project Eagle. By July 2015, DeWalt confirmed 7 American manufacturing plants across 6 states, from New Britain, Connecticut to Jackson, Tennessee. The Charlotte plant alone had produced over 10 million tools by 2016. Components and batteries are still globally sourced, but the assembly and final quality control happen on American soil, and for a significant number of contractors, that distinction matters. DeWalt also carried the yellow flag into motorsport. From 1999 to 2009, the brand sponsored NASCAR driver Matt Kenseth in the number 17 Ford, backing him through the 2003 Winston Cup Championship, the 2000 Rookie of the Year title, and the 2009 Daytona 500 victory. The partnership cycled through Marcos Ambrose, Eric Jones, and Christopher Bell through the 2020s. In July 2021, DeWalt announced a multi-year partnership with McLaren Formula One, putting yellow branding on rear wing end plates and driver suits, industrial tools on the side of a 200-mile-per-hour car. Raymond DeWalt would have appreciated the engineering, if not the speed. None of this happened without friction. In August 2022, DeWalt recalled approximately 1.4 million 12-inch sliding compound miter saws in the United States, and another 118,000 in Canada after reports that the rear safety guard could break or detach during operation. 571 reports of guard failure and 9 laceration injuries triggered the recall, followed by a class action lawsuit alleging the recall remedy was insufficient, and the competitive landscape has never been more intense. Milwaukee Tool, under Joseph Galley's strategic leadership at Tektronix Industries, has closed the gap on nearly every front. The M18 fuel brushless platform, anchored by red lithium batteries and sold exclusively through Home Depot, has become the working electrician's and plumber's weapon of choice. Makita's LXT 18-volt platform remains beloved by woodworkers for its balance and precision. The 3 brands now form a triangle of dominance, with DeWalt holding the widest retail distribution and ecosystem breadth, Milwaukee commanding the most aggressive pro-trade loyalty, and Makita anchoring the precision and ergonomics benchmark. On a commercial job site today, the color of a contractor's tools says something about who they are. Red is the specialist's badge, teal is the craftsman's quiet signal, and yellow is the universal default, the color that says this person showed up to work. Walk onto any major construction project on Earth and you will see it. A sea of industrial yellow stacked on trucks, clipped to belt hooks, lined up on plywood benches. Every one of those tools traces its lineage back to a shop superintendent in southern New Jersey who watched a man lose his fingers to a table saw and decided the machine should yield to the worker, not the other way around. Raymond DeWalt never saw the yellow swarm. He died in 1961, teaching shop class in a Pennsylvania high school, less than a year after Black & Decker bought his company from AMF. He never met Nolan Archibald or Joseph Galley. He never held a flex-volt battery or a power stack cell. He never heard the phrase cordless revolution. But every tool in the Yellow Empire still runs on his original principle. The blade moves. The worker stays safe. The machine serves the hand. He built a saw that moved so his men would not have to bleed. 100 years later, that idea is still the beating heart of every yellow tool on every job site on the planet. If you made it this far, you belong here. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.